Let's start with our introductions. State Senator Ken Paxton. Next is Representative Dan Branch. Federal Commissioner Barry Smitherman. Gentlemen, what we're going to do is we're going to go through several different issues. You'll have about 2 minutes to speak. Each of you will have 2 minutes to speak, and then at the end we'll have just a quick little conversation if you want to add something else, or perhaps, you know, as we had with the Lieutenant Governor debate, you know, throw a couple of punches, whatever, so on and so forth. Try not to hit the faces because it screws up the pictures anyway. If at the end of that you'll have a 2-minute closing statement. All right. So what do you say we jump in? We'll start with Barry Smith on our first issue. It has to do with courtroom experience. Courtroom experience having to do with the Attorney General. Let's talk a little bit about that, sir. Sir.
JD, thank you very much for moderating. Diane, thank you for your leadership. And thanks to all of you for being here. I'm the chairman of the Railroad Commission, and I appreciate those of you who supported me 2 years ago when I ran. I'm a former prosecutor from the Harris County District Attorney's Office. And in that capacity, I tried many cases, assaults, DWIs primarily. And in fact, most of my assault cases were cases where the victim, which is almost always a woman, later says it didn't happen, that she fell, or it was her fault, or that it was her mistake that her face collided with his fist. And in Harris County, we prosecute those cases, we don't drop them. And so I have more courtroom experience, particularly in the criminal setting, than the two guys who are here with me today. I've also led the state's effort to fight the Obama EPA. I'm a petitioner on 7 lawsuits against the EPA to stop the implementation of boneheaded, poorly scienced environmental regulations. And I'll tell you, we are winning. We're winning this battle, and 5 of these cases are going to the U.S. Supreme Court. And as chairman of the Railroad Commission and chairman of the PUC, oftentimes the Railroad Commission is called the Supreme Court of oil and gas. I have sat on over 10,000 contested documents. These are many trials. These are where we have parties who are competing against each other. And in that capacity, I have voted on every one of them. I've never missed a vote. And in my 10 years plus of public service, I've never missed a meeting or a vote. The Office of Attorney General has the authority and power to investigate and prosecute crime, particularly if the local DA requests help, or if there appears to be corruption or abuse. The AG should come in and either work with or take over that case. Thank you.
Next will be State Senator Ken Paxton.
I think I'm boxed in here. Well, thank you all for coming out. It's great to be in Denton County. I live right next door to you all. I've had 22 years of legal experience doing all kinds of different things. I graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law, which was founded by one of our founders, Thomas Jefferson. And I've had the opportunity to work in large firms, to work in corporate America. I've worked in medium-sized firms, and I have my own firm. I've had the opportunity to do all kinds of different areas of law, including litigation. I had a recent case involving one of my cities. They'd come in through the process of eminent domain and taken one of my client's properties and tried to claim that they were doing it for a public purpose. And we went into court and we argued that they were doing that inappropriately under the laws of Texas, and we were successful in getting a summary judgment. The reality is, in this job, Greg Abbott is not in the courtroom very often. What he has to be able to do, what the Attorney General has to be able to do, is strategically decide which cases to take. And when that's decided, strategically decide how they're going to be prosecuted. And with my 22 years of legal experience and also my 11 years of legislature, I've had to learn about strategy. And it's critical because not only do we have to have legal experience, learning the legislative process and knowing about the issues that Greg Abbott's had to deal with, voter ID, redistricting, the pro-life bill, marriage. These are all issues I've been involved in. So there's also a knowledge base that's critical to this job. So it's not just about being in the courtroom. Yeah, that's important. but you have to be able to think. You have to think like a lawyer. You have to think strategically. And being in the legislature, believe it or not, is pretty training for that. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you, JD and Diane, and all of you, Richard, all of my good friends here in Denton County. It's great to be here with you. Was here on the big dinner and happy to be part of the Lincoln cabinet. I want to say, mention that my wife and daughter here, Stacy and Catherine, have been married 29 years, and have 5 children, and 3 of them are out of college. So I see a little light at the end of the tunnel. Let me say something about courtroom experience. Someone said they had maybe the most. I'm not sure how many months as a junior prosecutor that involved around misdemeanor cases. But what I do know is that I had the opportunity after going to SMU Law School and graduated to have the unique experience to work for arguably the most important courtroom of the state, and perhaps one of the most important judges, the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court. So I spent a year working on opinions and cases and hearing oral arguments, and as one of the judicial clerks and briefing attorneys, I sat there for a full year and saw hundreds of different writs come in and sat in the conference of all the justices while they made the decision. One of the great things about being in that position is you get to sit in and hear the judges deliberate. Even the clerks at the U.S. Supreme Court don't get to do that. And I have many of our Texas conservative U.S. Supreme Court clerks endorsing our candidacy, 8 of them. Go to our website and check that out at danbranch.com. But I have spent time in arguably the most important courtroom of the state, and I have spent a lot of time practicing law, more time than anyone else up here before me, 30 years. And I'm the only one that's the highest rated. There's a rating in our profession, and I am rated preeminent for skills, legal abilities, and for ethics. And I'm the only one up here that has that rating. The longest serving. I've spent my life practicing law. It's a tough business. It's long hours. It's sacrifice away from family. It's working hard for your clients. I've been in very large firms, some of the best firms in our state. I'm now in one of the largest firms in our state. In between, I started my own firm and built it up. From two people, ultimately we had 30 folks, and we merged it into now one of the largest firms in the state of Texas. So I have spent my life practicing law. I get the courtroom. I also get the importance of negotiation, of settlement, of strategy. Spent over a decade, like Ken mentioned, in the legislature, and it looks like my time's about. But I am the one who has actually practiced law for the extent of my life, and so look forward to, if I can earn your trust, look forward to serving. Sorry.
No problem. I just kind of stalk them quietly. Wonder what I'm going to do. No, it wasn't that quite okay. Now, does anybody have anything else they want to say? Does anybody want to question anybody else, their character or the way they dress? No? Just want to move on to the next thing? It is a nice tie, isn't it? That's really very good. Yeah. The best part about that tie is it matches my tongue. Next. Just wanted to see if you were awake. Just check. Next up. Let's talk a little bit about management experience and experience with large operating budgets. What is it like to sit astride so much money to be able and make sure that the correct decisions get made? I mean, it must be an amazingly difficult proposition. We'll start next off with our state senator, Ken Baxter.
I also wanted to introduce my wife of 27 years, Angela Paxton. I always call her Angela, saying it's the way it plays.
Your time has been extended by 10 seconds for being announced.
Thank you. I always told Angela, I ran for state rep, I said it'd be a whole lot easier for us to get elected if you ran. But she didn't go to law school. Very gentle. You know, I've had the opportunity to manage businesses. I've had the opportunity to manage my law firm. I've had the opportunity to manage my title company. I've managed other businesses. I've managed budgets. So I know what it's like to write a check, and I know what it's like to have to cover checks when you're not making enough. I've also, being in the legislature for 11 years, I've had the opportunity to deal with large budgets. And honestly, My first couple of years, I wasn't always voting for our budgets. We had a year in 2005 where I voted against our budget. And as Dan Patrick said this time, he voted against our budget, and I also voted against our budget. I've had the opportunity to work with billions of dollars. And in this state, we should be doing budgets that are population plus inflation. And in the last 11 years, we've had several budgets we've had to vote against. I've had the opportunity to vote both on budgets, but I've also had the opportunity to run businesses.
Okay, let's we had another minute. Representative Dan Branch, go ahead, it's your turn.
The question is budgets.
We're talking about management experience and experience with large operating budgets.
Well, I've been in the private sector, as I mentioned, and I've helped run law firms, and I've had to run my own law firm, and I can tell you, when I left Baker & Botts, and ultimately we started Langley & Branch, and we spent almost a decade building that firm up. I think it was the best experience I ever had. And the reason is, not because I missed so many soccer games and had to work and often miss sacrifice with family, which is hard, but what I did get from that experience, which was fundamental in being a policy leader and being privileged later in life now to serve in the legislature, was to see government intruding on small business and to see when these various federal and state acts, whether it's a tax or whether it's an unemployment issue or an employment issue or whether it's an HR position or whether it's the Family Leave Act, all these laws I learned at 20 employees, those are your small businesses, you know, at 20 certain laws kick in, at 25, at 30, at 50, and so when you have these laws kick in, it really hits you as to the effect government can have. And it sort of reminds you that the less government we have, the better, particularly when it's these sort of mindless forms or senseless taxation or disincentives that are created on small business folks. So for me, in addition to serving on the Appropriations Committee and working with a very large budget in the state and pushing us toward balancing 6 budgets and leaving the most we've ever had in the rainy day fund and having a AAA rating during our time now in the legislature. I mean, I'm proud that our Republican majority has brought home an incredibly conservative budget, and now 1,400 people a day are entering into Texas, many into Denton County. And your listeners, John David.
Railroad Commissioner Barry Smith.
The Office of the Attorney General is a giant agency, 4,200 employees in 96 different offices around our state with a $546 million a year budget. It's a $500 million a year. As chairman of the Railroad Commission, I lead a 725-person agency with a $100 million a year budget. In the last 2.5 years, we've issued more drilling permits than we have in 30 years during the same period of time. We're using less taxpayer dollars to do it. We've improved our performance. We're turning around drilling permits in 3 days. When I got there, it was weeks. We're turning around surface mining permits in 6 months. When I got there, it was 5 years. It's not about what you do, it's about how you do it. This job requires proven leadership experience. As chairman of the PUC, I oversaw the most competitive electric market in the world. And in fact, we did that at the same time. We returned over $100 million in appropriated but unexpended money back to the citizens of Texas. And today, electric rates in Texas are at their lowest level in 10 years. You need leadership experience to run the Attorney General's office. In the private sector, I spent 17 years running a group, signing both sides of the paycheck. I understand what it's like to have to meet a budget, to have to terminate people and downsize, to have to come within your constraints. Practicing law is fine. We all need to be lawyers. I'll match my legal experience up against anyone. But the Office of Attorney General is about being the leader of this giant agency, marshaling your troops to accomplish the right mission and the goals of the agency. In the last 10 years, the budget of the state of Texas has increased by 60%. In my personal budget, the Railroad Commission, we are flat. I've taken no raise, neither of my employees, and we've returned money back to the state.
Okay, all right, fantastic. And next up, I guess that's the topic, is that correct? You guys need to have a conversation now, and why are you all looking at me like this? Do you have anything else you'd like to add? Okay, so we talked to everybody, got the chance to talk. Okay, here we go. All right, he's reaching to the microphone. Next up. See, they're supposed to have these conversations, they're supposed to just jump in and have these wonderful things. This never ever works, but somebody at NPR thought it was a great idea. I guess it just comes to the fact that they don't see enough moderators sweating enough these days. So let's move on. Yes,
David,
yes.
I'll respond.
Go ahead. You've got 30 seconds.
I would say that I've had the opportunity to manage budgets from a small business standpoint, to a very large law firm, to the state of Texas. We're involving billions of dollars. And so that's been a good experience for me, serving on appropriations, serving as member of the legislative budget board. It's been a good experience for me in managing large budgets. Living in the private sector, I saw medium and small sector.
4,000 people. I mean, it's an amazing number of people in this office.
It is, but let's remember, the state's budget is up 16% biennium from last biennium, plus you throw in $5 billion from the rainy day fund. It's a pretty dramatic increase. It's more than we've done in my household. I don't know about yours.
Anything else? Any rebuttal, Counselor?
This goes back to my point. We in the legislature, even as Republicans, have not done our job. The increase in our budget is growing faster than our population plus inflation, which means it's growing faster than what you're making. And as Republicans, I filed a bill probably 3 sessions in a row that would require that we live within our means, that we live within that metric that I just talked about. And that's just not something we've done. And for some reason, House leadership, Senate leadership has not seen it fit to put us inside of constraints that could keep us within those limits.
All right, let's move on to our next.
You weren't pointing at me when you meant Senate leadership. You're just pointing toward Governor Bueller.
There you go. That's what he was now. Let's move on to our next topic. What proactive steps? I mean, with the current federal government, I think that most people in this room would say, let's see, how would I put this? Flamingly out of control. How about that? What do we do about state sovereignty? What do we do about state sovereignty as more and more big bills come out of Washington, unfunded mandates, etc.? What do we do about that? Let's start with Representative Dan Branch.
And I promise to give you some time back. I've been long ago. Let me say this. I think this is the fundamental reason for me to run for Attorney General. Standing up to an overreaching, aggressive, I would say this administration, arrogant federal government. And so we need someone, as a Texan, it's the first time in 12 years after the longest serving Attorney General, Greg Abbott, will move into the governorship. Here. We'll have a chance to pick an Attorney General. A lot of people ask me as I go around the state, a lot of people ask us, will you be as tough as Greg Abbott? And my answer is, we're going to have to have someone who's even tougher, because the environment that we're in is going to get worse than what General Abbott has experienced, because once we get through this midterm, we're going into the last 2 years of the Obama legacy and the Obama bureaucrats' personal legacies, and they're going to start threatening states like Texas and using regulations to try and get an end that they want, a big government redistribution end that they want. And so we better stand up and just take one example. One example, you could pick the IRS, you could pick the NSA, you could pick the DOJ, the EPA. We got a lot of examples. They would just pick up the newspaper. But the federal government, I don't think it's unpatriotic to point out to the national government that they do have a role. They shouldn't be encroaching on individual liberties and on our states' rights, but they should secure our international border. They should negotiate and defend our international treaties and make sure our farmers get the water that they deserve. And right now, tonight, the DPS and the Texas Rangers are spending millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in order to secure the border because the national government's failed. And if I'm elected your Attorney General, I'm going to bring litigation, not just for incarceration costs, but for all the costs. The U.S. government owes the state of Texas all these costs for 150 Texas Rangers spending almost all of their time managing an unsecured border. There you go. I'll give you back the time.
We gave you back 2.5 seconds. That's awesome. Next up, Commissioner Smitherman.
Every candidate talks about fighting Obama. I'm fighting Obama. I've sued the Obama EPA 7 times. I am Greg Abbott's client. We have taken those cases to stop the implementation of primarily climate change legislation, the attempted regulation of greenhouse gases, particularly CO2. And I've been on the leading edge of those battles. Because if those regulations are put in place, it will dramatically harm the Texas economy. That case is going to be heard before the U.S. Supreme Court in February. A week ago Friday, I was down on the border meeting with local constables. And I suggested that we put together a task force of lawyers and investigators from the Attorney General's office working with local DAs, law enforcement constables, and investigators. Because, ladies and gentlemen, crime along the border is out of control. Border Patrol will not arrest anyone. Did you know that? They will give chase, but they will not stop. They will harass, but they will not arrest. And so now it is up to the local constables to enforce the law. And they need help. And I'm the Attorney General, we're going to give them help. Lastly, I would say this, JD. Some time ago, I gave an interview about preparing Texas so that regardless of what happens outside of our borders, we can be the great place in America to live and work and raise a family. I don't have any control over what happens north of the Red River, but I do have control over what happens in Texas. Now, some people said I was advocating for secession. We've been an independent country once before. I'm not an advocate for secession. I'm an advocate for preparation. I want the rest of America to be like us. I don't want to leave the Union. I want them to come to us. Be like we are. But when I swear an oath to the state of Texas, my oath is to prepare this state to be the greatest place in the world, regardless of what happens, whether it's 17 trillion or 20 trillion of debt. We have to make this the beacon state.
Next up is State Senator Ken Paxton.
My biggest concern coming into session was the expansion of Obamacare. Medicaid expansion, state health care exchanges. I was scared because all of the Democrats were for that, and many Republicans were as well. I spent my entire session blocking bills in the Senate that had the expansion of Medicaid and state health care exchanges in them. We were successful. But you know what? It's easy in a Republican primary to say you're going to stand with the federal government and that you're going to stand up to Obama. That's what everybody says. You heard the lieutenant governor candidates. You've heard us. The question is, how do you know? Well, in our world, in the Texas world, the Republicans control the legislature. And the only way you really know what people are going to do is what they do in their own party. And if you look at my 11-year track record, whether it's standing up on budgets, I can tell you it's very unpleasant to vote against your own party in a budget. People are not happy about it. But you know what? When it's the right thing to do, that's what I've done twice. I've stood up against tax increases, whether it's the margins tax or whether it was a little thing called TILADA that was designed to tax you on how many miles you drove. Guess what? Those were both Republican bills that I fought tooth and nail. I lost on the margins tax, but I won on the TILADA deal. And you don't pay taxes on how many miles you drive now. I also stood up when I had no desire to run for speaker several years ago, but we had just gone from a 76-74 majority, just barely holding majority, to 100 Republicans. And yet, the deal had been cut. 65 Democrats and 11 Republicans elected the speaker. Nobody would run against the speaker. I ran. You find out about courage by looking at what people have done in the past. I would encourage you to look at what we've done in the past to demonstrate that courage. That's how you know who's going to stand up and fight Obama and Eric Holder.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to this, add to the comments and so on? State sovereignty is just a huge issue, and when the 10th Amendment was brought up, and indeed the word secession was brought up, it was being actually, among the rest of us, it was being very seriously talked about. I mean, I've always said, mainly to the troops that I have the privilege to lead in the Texas State Guard, that Texans teach Americans how to be American. And if not here, where? But we need more amplification on this secession issue. Obviously, we're not going to secede from the Union, but how do we make it an unequivocal statement to Washington, D.C. to fend on this obvious attempt to try to step on the states?
Well, I think we are making that unequivocal statement. I think 1,400 people a day pouring into Texas are telling the nation, and that's why Time Magazine, which is about to look like run its course, have you seen how thin it's gotten? But just a few weeks ago, I think they're trying to save its circulation, printed an issue, front page, why is America becoming like Texas? Now, there was some snarky stuff in there, but there was some of the stuff they couldn't deny. Our balanced budgets, our surging economy, our AAA rating, our population increases. Everyone's pouring in here because they want more opportunity, they want less regulation, they want less taxation. So I think we are, by having a conservative legislature, Republican legislature, I think we are being a model for the rest of the country.
Commissioner.
We are blessed to have our own grid. We're not interconnected with the rest of the country. We need to maintain that independence. We have our own oil and gas pipelines and power plants. I would say we would also suggest, in addition to energy, let us take over healthcare and education. Let us design a program that works for Texas. Whether it's healthcare or in education, reject and fight against Common Core. Let us educate our children the way we want to. We are the only state that has the ability to do all these things ourselves. Let's exercise that ability.
Senator.
Look at the Democratic states. California, New York, Illinois, Michigan. They're losing jobs to this state. I'm not ready to give up on America. And I think that Texas needs to be the example for the country. We are the Republican leader. We are the economic leader. If we fail, the nation fails. If we succeed, the nation succeeds. I'm convinced that Texas is going to lead this country out of Obamanism, out of socialism. It doesn't work. It's never worked. Or Margaret Thatcher's word, eventually you run out of other people's money. We're going to do this. We have the ability, with the kinds of people that we have in Denton County, the kinds of people that we have in Collin County, the kinds of people we have in Tarrant County, we can win this fight. We have to win this fight.
Let's move on to our next topic. Again, 2 minutes for each of the candidates. We're going to talk about what was the most rousing debate last round and with the lieutenant governors, and that's the border. The state of Texas is, certainly, it looks to me, at least, one of the whipping posts when it comes to the Obama immigration policies. They have made it very, very clear that border should stay open. In fact, as it was brought up, the president came down and said the border's never been more secure. What are your thoughts on that? And please tell us what you plan to do about it.
You need to go to the border. Anybody here from the border? Anybody have property along the border? Everybody ever heard of the border? Let me tell you what's happening down there. People are losing their property. They are walking away from it out of fear. When I was down there last, I saw homes, businesses, and ranches that had been abandoned. Imagine that. Your parents and grandparents worked for years to protect this property, to leave it to you, and you can't occupy it. Imagine that you walked out on your front lawn tonight, and people were camped out there, and you could not ask them to leave for fear that they would hurt you or your family. That is the situation along the border. The federal government is not going to do anything about it. I saw it from my own eyes. Helicopters flying around, Border Patrol on horseback. It's just a show. They're not doing anything, so it's up to us. And it's easy to do, really. You prosecute crime. You break the law, you go to jail. I don't care if it's assault, DWI, trespass, vagrancy, spitting on the sidewalk, loitering. I don't care what it is. You break the law. And by the way, if you're here and someone asks you to leave and you don't, that's criminal trespass. You can go to jail. Now, Dan, misdemeanor is a crime. Up to a year of punishment in jail. It's a serious crime. We have the tools available to put these people in jail. And then we send a message. If you're coming to Texas and you break the law, you're going to suffer the consequences. Go through New Mexico. But don't come here. Don't come to Texas.
Senator.
So Dalton, did you know that on the Texas border there is a shift change for the border agents? And there's a break where no one's there when they're changing shifts. Sounds like a pretty easy solution, at least as a start. That's actually what happens on the border. I talked to a guy that's down there and he told me they do a shift change. And there's a period of time when they do a shift change when no one's there, and that's when people come across. It's insane, and it's easily fixable. Second of all, I agree with the Lieutenant Governor candidates. We do need to put more money into border security. We've done that, and we need to do more of it. 4 years ago, I tried to pass a bill. It's called the 287G program. Do you remember Arizona tried to deal with their problem? And it was preempted by federal law. The Supreme Court came in and said you can't do that. The 287G program was designed by Congress in 1994. It was passed. Lamar Smith from Texas carried it. All we have to do is adopt that program in Texas, and it allows our guys, our local police, our local border people to detain and hold these people that they can't do right now. It's not happening. And it is a simple step to begin correcting the problem that we have now, which is an invasion of our state. You know, some of these things, while they're complicated, there are simple steps we can take to begin solving the problem. But as Republicans, we haven't done that, and we need to. And if they can give us the tools as Attorney General, we can enforce it.
Next up is Representative Dan Branch.
As I said earlier, this is fundamentally a problem of the failure of our national government. It's unacceptable. And therefore, as the state's Attorney General, I will stand up to this federal government and use every power I have, everything we have in the toolbox. Sometimes I hear that money talks. And so if the federal government is going to be held liable, I just spent some time with the Department of Public Safety, the leadership, and the leadership of the Texas Rangers. And learned about our program, more about our program. We've been sending a lot of money down there for local law enforcement, for more equipment, for more personnel, for more boots on the ground. And the extent of this program is amazing to me. It's shocking that I asked the leadership the other day, I said, so you're telling me that all this effort, nearly 1,000 cameras along the border, all this personnel, all these people, they did a special push in the fall where they had extra people down there. All this is happening because of failure of our federal government. And the leader of the DPS, and the leader of our Texas Rangers said, yeah. I said, I'm not trying to be political. I'm just saying, if you didn't have this issue, we wouldn't be spending hundreds of millions of dollars in man hours on this project. And the answer was yes. And so to me, this is, as Ken said, it's pretty simple. When you got that sort of a dramatic failure, someone needs to bring it to their attention. And the state's top lawyer better step into that gap and bring this to the attention of the federal government and bring it to the attention of the rest of the states that we won't put up with a national government that fails a state like Texas, one of the most important economies, just because it happens to be a border state. So I'll stand up.
Let me ask this question. Go ahead.
Let me add to this. It's not just about more money. That's the typical reaction. Normally, let's throw some more money at it. A lot of it's about common sense. As I drove along the border, I saw about a half-a-mile wide strip of complete wilderness. Some of the toughest South Texas land you could ever imagine. Right up next to the river. I said, hey, here's an idea. Why don't we take a bulldozer and clear that out so that we can see people crossing the river? And the local constable said to me, well, Fish and Wildlife won't let us do that. Are you kidding me? Take a flamethrower to it. I mean, let's use some common sense. We are providing them with a place to hide and to stage, and we know it. But another arm of the federal government won't let us clear.
let's ask a little bit about, okay, so it's criminal trespass. Why don't we send DPS down to those southern ranches and cart them off by the bushel baskets full for criminal trespass? Why don't we do that? Go ahead. Why don't we start with Senator Paxton on this one? Why don't we just do that? Why don't we actually enforce those laws and get those people off that land on a continual enough basis so that they realize that that's not a place where they can go?
Absolutely. We look for any angle we can get on this. If it's trespass, whatever violation of law that we can apply, we need to do. But Gene, I want to go back to this 287G program that I talked about. I'm telling you that we can look for little angles, like trespass, but that's not the long-term solution. This 287G program, I'm telling you, look at it. Tell your representatives, get Ron Simmons. Ron Simmons would be a great guy to carry this bill. It is a bill that can really change what's going on in the border. And I encourage you all to educate yourself on it, because instead of trying little angles on this, we need a big angle, and this one will work.
All right. Those are the topics that we have brought to the table. That is the debate that we have had. Let's now move to our closing segments, our closing statements. And for that, let's go ahead and start with Senator Paxton. Go ahead, since you've got the microphone. Go ahead.
Thank you all for being here. Have y'all ever heard this is the most important election of your life? I'm going to make the case that it is. In Texas, we're about to elect, potentially, all new statewide officials. That didn't happen very often. It's been over a decade. But not only that, we're at a critical time in our history. Not just Texas history, but U.S. history. So your decision, not just on the Attorney General's race, but all of these races is critical. You are critical not just to the state of Texas, but to the whole country. Because if we don't get it right, if you don't get it right, the whole country's in trouble. So my question to you is, how are you going to do that? Well, a couple of years ago, we did have this little election, and we elected this guy, Barack Obama. Y'all remember that? Kathy, Steve. He got up, yes. He got up and told the American people all kinds of stuff. Supposedly a good speaker, I never thought so. Great presentation, smart, but he didn't talk about the things he'd done. No one went back and looked at his record. If you'd gone back to the Illinois State Senate, you would have seen it was a disaster. If you looked at his U.S. Senate record, you would have found he was the most liberal senator in the U.S. Senate. So what I'm asking you to do, since I have 25 seconds, I'm asking you, don't listen. The rhetoric is going to be somewhere all across the candidate spectrum. Go back and look at history. Go back and look at our records. Go back and look at what we've done. Look at who's endorsed us, because that also says, when you have Kathy Adams, who is here in the audience, endorse you. When you have Michelle Smith, endorse you. My time is up. You guys have to get this right. Please do your research. Look at the past. I think if you do that, you'll cast good votes. Thank you all for coming here. I appreciate your time, and God bless you.
Representative Danforth.
Thank you, JD, and I guess they're passing out the red ballots, which is appropriate for Republicans. And I'm here to ask you for your vote, not just for tonight, but also in the election on March the 4th, and of course early voting that starts on February the 18th. And why should you give me your vote? Why should you give Dan Branch your vote? Well, we talked a little bit about qualifications. I am a practicing lawyer. I'm the only one who's practiced for 30 years. I'm the only one that's sort of ranked at the highest level. But let's go beyond that. I've been in the legislature. I've been privileged to serve, and I've had the opportunity to pass major legislation. I'm the one who passed and returned prayer to our school today. Thank you. When your children went to school, 5 million of them got to say the moment of silence. Got to have a moment of silence prayer. Got to say the Texas Pledge. Got to say the U.S. Pledge. Because I stood up. And when I came here 10 years ago in 2003, I was told, leave that alone, Branch. We're not going back there. And I refused to believe it. I worked with Craig Abbott. I worked with a young solicitor named Cruz. and we ultimately got the language right. We were thoughtful about it. We knew we could pass it with a Republican majority, but we passed it and it's sustained in the federal courts, sustained in the Fifth Circuit with his successor, Ted's successor, Jim Hope, endorsing our campaign. I've got one of these. A nice picture of Stacy and the kids. Luckily, our kids favor my wife. But on the other side, why don't you take a look at one of these? I'm not going to read them off here, but I'm really privileged because of my record of getting things done, whether it's on open government transparency or limited government. We've had just last in November, or on returning fair to school, standing up to federal judges. I've been fortunate to have the senior leadership of Greg Abbott, his guys who work for him, his senior lieutenants, take a look at all 3 candidates in support of our race. The senior leadership for Ted Cruz take a look at support of our race. You go on down, the majority of the officers, senior lawyers from across the law enforcement, the foreigners, we have a lot of endorsements. Take a look at Dan Branch for Attorney General. Thank you.
Next up, very simple.
Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. This is the strategic plan of the Office of Attorney General, drafted by Greg Abbott. It says the office will defend the state of Texas, its laws and constitution, its agencies, and investigate and prosecute crime. Those are the first two. It doesn't say anything in there about making votes, drafting real estate contracts, or probating wills. This is a leadership position, and you need an experienced leader who's a fighter. Someone with a history of fighting. I'm the only one who has that history. You got to fight the fights that need to be fought. Let me tell you a story. I'm going to close with this misdemeanor story. We had a person who had assaulted his girlfriend. We had him on misdemeanor family assault. Put her on the stand. She can't even remember her name. She's so afraid. She starts battling. Got her off rehabilitated. Put the officer on. He said, I've never seen anyone get beat up so badly. 3 days of testimony. What I knew, what the defense attorney knew, and what the defendant knew, is that 20 years before he had been convicted of raping and assaulting a nun in Chicago. I could easily have dismissed that case. I could have walked away from it. I could have said it was too hard. Just like you could say that fighting Obama maybe is too hard, or that I'm inexperienced, or I've never waged this kind of battle. But you must fight the fights that need to be fought, and you fight them all the way. You don't quit in the middle of it. You don't pull up when it looks like the odds are against you. The Attorney General of Texas is the pointed edge of the spear against this federal government. So when you pick somebody for this job, you better pick a fighter. You better pick somebody who knows their way around the courtroom, who will stand between you and this federal government. I'm Barry Smitherman. Go to BarryForTexas.com. Thank you very much.
Representative Van